On the verge of disaster, why did the European Union declare a state of climate emergency? More than 30 years ago from now, talking about climate change was just for scientists. In fact, these scientists sitting on their desks and wearing their elegant coats were not able to communicate the facts they knew to the world. They have a probability-weighted language, and it cannot affect the audience's feelings. Many politicians took advantage of this opportunity to silence scientists and climate initiatives year after year. But something stronger than words happened, and that thing began to change the picture. Climate change itself has already come. Ugly climate. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced last year 2019 would be the second warmest year in the history of our temperature measurement, which is 150 years ago. You must have noticed this last summer. It was the hottest according to our knowledge, and its heat spread to fall. We went through hot nights in October to November, reminiscent of the summer heat. But the most striking thing is when we mention the 10 hottest years in the history of measurement, because it all falls over the past 2 decades. Speaking to Al Jazeera, Dr. William Ripple, professor of forestry at the University of Oregon, says, "Climate change is more rapid than scientists have expected. It threatens natural ecosystems and the destiny of humanity," explaining that this type of climate strikes will continue as long as we do not take action on the matter, despite the many responses we see during the current decade. One of those responses is when the European Parliament, the place that represents more than 500 million people on the continent of Europe, declared a state of climatic emergency with 429 votes compared to 225. It called for strict measures to stop greenhouse gases completely by the middle of this century. But the most striking thing was insisting on one important point, which is if everyone wants change, then no one is behaving this way. And while the youth demonstrations escalated in many countries of the world on climate change issues, the European Union was not the first to declare a climate emergency, which simply means that that country or entity regards climate change as a reality, and that the measures taken about it are not commensurate with the size of the event. The Australian Medical Association (AMA) was the first to make the announcement with a statement: "The high rate of deaths and illnesses due to heat stress, injuries, and deaths due to increasingly severe weather events, the increase in transmission of infectious diseases, food insecurity caused by low agricultural outputs, and a high rate of mental illness, they are more than good reasons to declare a climate emergency." In fact, the primary problem facing the public when trying to understand climate change, these are the usual news releases that talk about increasing the global average temperature by 1 degree. Here the person asks himself, saying, "This is not a problem, so what would harm if the temperature reached 35 in the summer instead of 34, for example?" But the matter is really quite different. The AMA statement is a perfect example. Right up to the Pope's house. Ripple says, average temperatures rise globally. The rates and intensity of harsh hot waves increase. We feel that we are approaching a catastrophic, irreversible turning point, especially with rapid thaw. He explained that when average temperatures rise, this allows the climate system to increase tension and instability. Anomalies such as heat waves increase. It becomes normal for them to hit our countries in a row so that people think something strange is happening. Meanwhile, some of the organisms harmful to humans find an opportunity to thrive and get more vitality. The incidence of diseases due to it increases. For the same reason, the rates of illness resulting from heat stress increase. The lives of patients with hypertension and diabetes are particularly vulnerable. Some workers in certain occupations are also at greater risk. In fact, we can see the impact of climate change clearly in the heat wave that hit Russia in 2010. It killed more than 55,000 people. Its main victims were cardiovascular, kidney disease patients and diabetes. We will soon address the repercussions of climate changes on human health, and how you are no more than an inch from its effects, while you are at home, where you feel safe. Many similar announcements followed the one from AMA during the past few years. Scotland and England were the first countries to declare a state of climate emergency last summer. This announcement was followed by several institutions. Pope Francis, the Pope of the Vatican, had also declared a state of climate emergency, saying that what is happening is unjust, brutal action for the poor and future generations, adding that our children and grandchildren should not bear the cost of irresponsibility for our generation. Because of that apparent contention in declaring a state of climate emergency around the world, the well-known Oxford Dictionary platform selected climate emergency, word of the year in 2019, in reference to the language change that occurred last year, escalating the conversation about climate change globally, meaning that the words from that point of view, its change, and the form of discourse it uses, reflects the world's interests and issues. There is no doubt that the past year was a year to inquire about climate change. 100 companies. Professor William J. Ripple completes his speech saying, "But that is not enough. Despite 40 years of global negotiations on the matter, we have so far failed to fully address this crisis. Even with repeated warnings from scientists, world leaders lack the political will to move forward with radical actions." But in fact, the reasons for this controversy are not political, rather it is mainly related to money. You may not know that only 100 companies around the world are responsible for emitting about 70% of the greenhouse gases in the world. According to a number of studies in this range, these companies paid about $2 billion for political pressure on environmental and climate movements, in order to avoid paying climate taxes over the past few decades until now. That's why James Hansen, a former NASA physicist which earned the famous title, Father of Climate Change's Awareness, he had stated just a short time ago that there is no direct solution except by suing those companies. But the urgent question is, has the Earth reached the point of no return? To understand how sensitive this problem is, let's start from a disastrous turning point, with which we will have to change our history books. Where we will record in books that September 2016, it is the month in which carbon dioxide levels exceed 400 parts per million barrier for the first time in our history as human beings. During the 400,000 years ago, the figure danced only between 160 and 300 ppm. Several decades ago, scientists were waiting for this point. Some called it the point of no return, not because something will happen then, but because we now know it takes 40 years for the Earth to return as it was. But Professor Ripple and his companions, and we're talking about 11,000 scientists from 153 countries in a recent research paper, they see that we can save the rest. This huge team of scientists had also decided to declare a state of climate emergency. In a global message he said, according to Ripple's statement, scientists of the world have a moral obligation to warn people of the coming dangers. We feel that the time allowed for making the decision is almost over. World scientists believe that there are 6 criteria that the world's politicians must work to achieve, includes discontinuation of fossil fuels, discontinuation of harmful environmental pollutants, such as methane and chlorofluorocarbons, preserving the environmental system from damage, especially as it faces problems due to climate change, reducing meat in diets and inviting people to eat more vegetables and grains, because this prevents the exploitation of green areas as well as emission of methane resulting from raising cows. The team also hinted at the need to control the population of the planet, supporting the economy so that it is profitable from the systems that protect the environment and climate. You may see it as utopian dreams that are hard to achieve, but our life on this planet depends on it. Before the Industrial Revolution, if someone came out with such statements, people would have considered him a dreamer or a science fiction novelist, but we are literally at the verge of danger. Everything happens quickly, and rates of change are accelerating like never before. The biggest problem is that the climate system is a complex system, its future cannot be expected, which simply puts us as a feather in the wind. Ripple says at the end of his speech, everything we have seen so far has been partial solutions. There must be radical solutions, so that our food, our work, the way we live and our economy move through these solutions. But can world politicians act with some wisdom on this issue? This is a difficult question. There is a lot of intransigence and tampering based on special interests. On the other hand, some day-to-day movements have appeared, so that we can see climate events, but we also see deaths and mass migrations due to climate change. It feels like we are human beings in the contemporary world. We dance on the edge of chaos. Either we fall, or not.